Hello, hello, hello. So, welcome to our second session in our Solving for the Most Vulnerable series. Today, we'll be looking at what justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion has to do with it. As always, we are hoping that you find the information engaging and enlightening. Before we get into it, though, I want to remind you that this part of the session is being recorded. If you're live with us today, you'll find a handout for the session in the invite. You can use it to record your thoughts. There will be some prompts throughout the session. One last thing, those prompts, you'll see a slide. This is a visual signal that you can pull out your handout or whatever you're using to take notes to jot down your thoughts. Our agenda. So as always, we'll start with our commitments. Then we'll review Solving for the Most Vulnerable Session 1 content. After that, we'll deep dive into each JEDI element and how they impact solving for the most vulnerable. Then we'll wrap up our recorded portion with a summary and a sneak peek into what's next. As with all our JEDI sessions, this will be a brave space, which calls for us to identify and address our individual discomforts while creating a safe environment for others to do the same. And since this is the me talking portion, I'm not going to read through the commitments individually, but I'm going to ask that you all commit to being brave as we review the content. So I want to open with this quote from the great Octavia Butler's novel, Parable of a Sower. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. And if nothing else, this is how I personally see life. If it can be something else, I invite you to understand this as the foundation of all the content I ever have and ever will present, and why I believe it's valuable. We are all always changing the world. We live within systems, and systems within systems, and systems that interact with systems, and systems embedded in systems that interact with other systems. And all those systems are working exactly as they are designed to. In systems, there are no such thing as bugs. On our first reflection slide, I want you to think about, what if you were charged with building a school? What grade levels would you offer? Kind of classes, teaching methods? I'm going to pause for a couple seconds to give you a moment to collect your thoughts. I think we can all agree that school systems are systems, and that those systems are designed. We are able to see how the design impacts society, how those who designed it changed the world, and how those changes have changed all of us. Who did you have in mind when you were designing your school? Odds are, when you designed your school, you were using your experiences or that of a child you personally know as the archetype for that design. Centering ourselves and our perspectives is just what we're used to. Now, before we talk about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, I do want to look back at some of the things we learned about the framework of solving for the most vulnerable. If you remember, solving for the most vulnerable is a problem-solving perspective that centers the needs of the person or group that is most susceptible to risk or has the greatest need of support. So imagine it's a zombie apocalypse, and we're in a building that's 5 stories tall. There's no stairs or elevator, just like a space where those things should be. And we need to get to the roof so we can be rescued, but I'm on the bottom floor. In order to get me to the top, we'd have to build a ladder. That ladder would have to be sturdy enough to hold me up and tall enough to get me to the top. Building this ladder also means, though, that anyone on the floors between the bottom where I am and the top where the roof is also can use the ladder. This is an example of how solving for the most vulnerable creates solutions that are better designed, have a positive impact on the most people, and have less unintended side effects. Because if we build a bad ladder, then I'm just lunch. The framework of solving for the most vulnerable starts with identifying a problem. This requires us to be aware of ourselves, others, and the environment. When identifying the most vulnerable after that, we can identify the most vulnerable within the context, which requires a risk needs analysis so we can figure out who has the greatest risk or the most need of support. After that, we refine the problem from the perspective of the most vulnerable, which requires consent from the most vulnerable and our trust in them to know what they need. It would be a waste of time, energy, and potentially very damaging to assume we understand a problem impacting someone else well enough to design a solution without their guidance and input. Only then can we design a solution to the refined problem, which requires us to look for potential side effects and consciously accept them. So I'm going to use a scenario loosely based on a real life situation. I'm adding that in case it rings true for any folks. This is not what really happened. So if it seems familiar, maybe it kind of is, but it ain't. That's not what happened. So you're on a team. And the DL portion of the team has delivery lead, designer, QE, developers. 5 of those developers are junior. And the client side has some QEs, some developers, and the dev lead. All of them are senior. Brandy's a junior. She's one of 2 developers on the team and the only Black team member. She's just put up a PR that has some extensive refactoring to the authorization sequence in the app. The team doesn't really have an agreed upon requirement for how many approvals you need, so she's going to wait for about 3. Along with the approvals comes in the normal deluge of comments that she's been consistently getting since she started working solo. She goes through all of them, addressing any that relate to functionality or cleaning up the code. For the others, she just comments that she appreciates the suggestions. Just when the PR finally gets enough approvals, the dev lead closes the PR without comment. The next morning, after stand-up, Brandy brings up the issue of having her PR closed. The dev lead says that it didn't get enough approvals, but Brandy's like, there's no agreed amount, and I got 3. Then he points out that she didn't address all the comments. But again, she's like, hey, we don't have any policy around what comments have to be addressed or which ones even block a PR. The dev asks her who she paired with. And she's like, I did this on my own, but my mentor looked over it. He says that she failed to meet expectations and really shouldn't be working without supervision. She points out that right now she's being penalized for failing to follow standards and expectations that were not clear before today, and that she can't professionally grow without opportunities to build features on her own. And right now in this moment, she's the only team member to ever have her work publicly questioned and taken away, which feels a little biased. The dev lead is offended by the suggestion that he's behaving biasly and suggests that Brandy is playing the race card. And that this behavior is just further proof that she's not experienced enough to really be on the team, really not work on her own. A few team members sent Brandy a private message stating that they don't think it's fair either, and that the dev lead was really demonstrating a bias. But the situation was ultimately resolved by the delivery lead assuring the dev lead that another developer would play the story. So my next question is, how was the framework for solving for the most vulnerable used in the story we just listened to? Well, from my perspective, the team didn't really use the framework at all. The dev lead obviously saw Brandy and her PR as the problem. And if any team member other than Brandy saw any other problem, they didn't speak up. They didn't analyze the situation, figuring out who needed support. They didn't ensure that they were solving the right problem, which means that while Brandy clearly states she needs opportunities, the solution did not provide it for her. Apologies. So, diversity, the differences of perspective. Equity, serving what is needed to thrive. Inclusion, the utilization of those differences. And justice, the implementation and its impact. When we designed our schools, we used our perspective as the template for our design. Our lens of the world was from where we are, through our experiences. We centered ourselves. That's the way most of us have been socialized to see the world and all its systems. It's how we've been socialized to design systems for the systems. With intention, though, we can decenter ourselves and our perspectives. We can interrogate the systems we see and build, evaluating them by the elements we know build better systems: justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. But what do we mean when we say diversity? So, this is a pine tree. It's got some lovely attributes: height, color, girth. This is a person. They also have lovely attributes: gender, height, race, age. Which of these two are diverse? As many characteristics as the pine tree has, we wouldn't call it diverse, right? Well, the same applies to people. While a person likely has many unique characteristics, a person should never be referred to as diverse. This is a small grove of trees. Each tree has height, color, and girth. This is a group of people. Each person has height, race, gender, age, sexual orientation. Which of these are diverse? Well, each of the trees have unique characteristics, and the whole is the grove, so the image of the trees is diverse. And each of the people have unique characteristics, and the whole is the group, so the image of the group is also diverse. Diversity is the collective representation of unique identities, ideas, beliefs, and perspectives. While a person can have a varied set of identities, ideas, beliefs, as we just established, the person themselves are not diverse. Diversity is a term that should only be used to describe a group or a pine grove, some kind of collective, not a single individual within it. Before we move on, though, I feel it's important to address diversity of thought because it comes up a lot when we talk about diversity. Diversity of thought is a thing, but it's not an alternative to diversity of identity. It's important, but it's actually a natural byproduct of teams, people with diverse identities. Like if you use an adaptive device to complete your daily living activities, then you're going to think about those activities different than someone who does not. That's diversity of thought, which is embedded in diversity of identity and comes from lived experiences. Just imagine how our digital ecosystem would be today if, in the infancy of its development, folks with visual, auditory, and physical impairments were part of the system designs. So, you're in a store. You got all the things you need and you're waiting in line. Got your debit card handy, you want to get in and get out. You notice that the person in front of you has their stuff on the counter, seems to be ready to complete their transaction, but they aren't able to because they don't have a digital payment accessible. If you're the only person in the store, or if every customer in the store had a credit card, you wouldn't have noticed anything amiss. But because there's diversity of access, of types of currency, you're able to see that there are very different experiences happening. But diversity doesn't just happen. It is built into the system's design. When we achieve more diversity than we anticipated, that means our design provided access and opportunity for it. When we plan for it, but we don't get it, it's because something in our design is an obstacle. Whether we intend to or not, diversity is always an aspect of our system design. When we intentionally choose to address it as a criteria of our design, then we have the opportunity to build a better system that generates opportunity for a broader perspective. Diversity asks us to interrogate our design. On our teams, this could look like asking who's the end user we're building for. And this might look like asking which team members are in the room during client meetings. This looks like calling out if a developer isn't around when discussing technical implementation. This could look like checking if a calendar invite wasn't sent. And this probably looks like sending a last-minute, very apologetic DM to see if those folks can join us. You're in a bookstore. Your friend gave you a recommendation and you're really excited to pick up the book. Now you're walking along all the shelves and you can't find it anywhere. Eventually you ask the assistant to help you find it. They recognize the author, lead you to the last aisle of the store, hand you the book, but then you notice that this is the section where all the Black authors are. You see science fiction mixed with romance and even nonfiction. If you had never gone looking for this book, you might not have ever seen how Black authors are segregated in the store by design. And yes, this does still happen in some stores today. Think about a time when you intentionally designed for diversity. Give you a moment here. Now, one of the things that comes in my head is on most teams, there's some kind of guidance about role representation during refinement. It's often written into the team agreement. So we decide that we want a diverse representation when we're talking about our project. So diversity is like the ingredients in a recipe, but like just kind of setting them on the table. Equity and inclusion is how we bring all those ingredients together to delight our taste buds. So how does equity do that? Trees share resources with one another. There's been studies into how some species actually form a collective to share nutrients. It's like the mycelial network, but on Earth. And this ensures that even if you don't get direct sunlight, you still get all the stuff you need to survive. Short trees aren't punished for being short. On a diverse team, everyone will have different experiences that provide them with unique perspectives, strengths, and stretches. When that diverse team is equitable, the team supports one another as each needs just as they are so they can thrive. Equity is the intentional structuralization of providing what is needed for an individual to thrive. This means we meet folks where they are, as they are, and give them what they need to go where they want to go. So your block is having a water fight. It's kids versus adults, and since the kids are smaller, giving them smaller balloons so they can hold them. To make up the size difference, you've given them 3 times as many and some super soakers. I suggest you watch out. Equity, like diversity, doesn't just happen. We get what we designed for. If our system is inequitable, it's because we made it that way. But that also means we have the power to design a system that has equity as an intentional design criteria. This allows us to see people in their fullness, respect their trajectory, trust them to know what they need, and do our very best to provide it. Equity asks us, what does each person in our collective say they need to thrive? This could look like a distressed friend and us asking what they need right now. We ask, do we already have what they need, or do we need to get it? And if it's our friend, we would look at what we're capable of providing as far as support. How will we provide it, though? And in the case of our friend, this might mean getting them access to a crisis hotline if they need urgent support we can't provide. You're in a bowling alley with some friends. The first 5 bowling balls you picked up are just too heavy for you to use. Eventually, you walk up to the counter and tell the attendant. But instead of telling you that's the only ball they carry, they walk you to a section that has more options, including the lighter ball you need. The equitable design of having multiple sizes, weight, and style of bowling balls, and then being accessible to players, provides an opportunity for many different players' needs to be met. Think about a time when you intentionally designed for equity? I think about how teams handle vacations. On every team members are encouraged to take the vacations that they need, but some teams even have staggered vacation schedules. And in my experience, if something comes up, the team does what they can to make sure that they get the time off. So if diversity is the ingredients on the table, then equity is the amount of each ingredient we need. What is inclusion? Forests have trees and animals and maybe even water sources full of fish, and they share all of those resources. An inclusive team is a team of diverse folks who have a structure of equity, which allows them to leverage their individual strengths and stretches for collaboration and creation. Inclusion is the intentional incorporation and operationalization of the uniqueness of each individual within the collective. For a team, a space, an organization to be inclusive, it has to intentionally cultivate an environment and culture where every individual can contribute their perspectives and insights towards creating and producing, be that an application, a party, or a policy. Inclusion requires that one feels as if they belong, just as they are right now, and that they can grow into who they want to be in the future. So you and your friends are out for a fun, full night of karaoke. You're not a singer, but you're really good at air guitar. So your friends give you space on the stage for a really great solo. Everyone cheers you on, even the audience. And while you didn't sing a word, the group made sure that you were still able to participate and put on a 5-star performance. Inclusion, like all the other elements, doesn't just happen. It's part of the design, built or not. When we intentionally have inclusion in our design criteria, we can ask ourselves, do those within our space have the space they need to share their awesomeness? Does this space leverage everyone's unique perspectives, where they are today and where they will be tomorrow? And does our space make space for friends we haven't met yet? Your neighborhood is discussing making some updates to the local park. To facilitate the decisions, every household is given a survey. The households that have children with disabilities are given more weight because those kids need more support. Inclusion being part of the design ensures that all voices are heard and concerns understood, while ensuring children that are most vulnerable are the ones that we solve for. Think about a time when you intentionally designed for inclusion. I'm going to go back to refinement sessions, where the team not only has QE representation, but make sure that the QE has all the information they need to understand how long something's going to take to test, and then includes those estimates inside of the estimation for the work overall. Now, we were speaking of equity and inclusion as separate topics, but they should be understood as codependent. One cannot really exist without the other. You cannot utilize the uniqueness of team members without understanding and providing what they need to thrive. And you cannot understand what folks need without cultivating an environment where they can safely exist as they are. So we've got diverse ingredients on the table, we've figured out equitable portions we need, and we've included them. So what is justice? Forests have rules, regulations, and structure, where things grow and where they don't. Did you know that the thorn acacia tree sends pheromone messages on the air when a giraffe nibbles on its leaves, so it can warn other siblings in the area that there's a threat? Which I know that the sub-Saharan African savanna is not a forest per se, but it's a woodland grassland ecosystem. And my point remains, there's a structure. A diverse team that equitably supports its team members is an inclusive culture. produces justice. Justice is the maintenance or administration of structured systems that align with what is morally upright, guided by truth, fairness, and equity. This is probably most obvious in situations where we observe an injustice, an outcome or disparity, unfairness, a harm that deviates from the stated intentions of the system. I do want to acknowledge it is 11:29, so if you do have to dip out, there are a couple more slides, but I understand, and this is being recorded, so feel free to watch it later. Your family decided that they want to get some household chores all done by Sunday, so they implement a chore schedule. Everyone in the house gets to choose what chores they want and what days they want to do them. Because the smallest household member can't safely reach the upper shelves, those dusting duties are split between high and low. Justice being part of the design means the work is equitably distributed in a fair way that still produces the desired results. Justice does not happen in a vacuum. It is how we operate our design system, how we evaluate it and make changes, and look at how far the outcomes of the system are from our intended design. So, it's a part of the design. Let's say we have a system that we've designed to include a diverse group of folks who are able to receive what they need to thrive in an environment that fully utilizes those perspectives. Yet, let's say that our design allows us to make in-the-moment modifications to who's in the room and what power they have. A system designed in such a way can easily stray from its desired goals and find its way to creating more damage than benefit. Being intentional with justice as a criteria of our design means we are asking, what is guiding our design decisions? On a team, this could look like calling out when negative feelings toward a client are impacting team decisions. How are we implementing the system? On a team, this looks like maybe rotating retro leaders alphabetically as defined in the team agreement. We're looking at impact of implementation. And on a team, this might look like retros where the team discusses the latest release. We look at impact alignment with our intentions. And on a team, this could be comparing the team's agreed processes for the release to the outcomes of the latest release. Most importantly, we can ask, what does the outcome we've designed for mean for our system? On a team, this probably looks like adjusting our team agreement based on lessons we learned from our last release. You've gone back to school, and this lecture class is rough. There's a lot of complex topics, and the instructor talks way too fast. After another not so great test score, you go to your instructor, and you're like, the only one who's passing are the people who are really good at taking notes. After a little investigation, the instructor sees the same thing. So the next week, the instructor informs the class that the design of the classroom has been updated so that each lecture will be recorded and made available for students to listen to later, as well as transcribed. Think about a time when you intentionally designed for justice. Yes, I am a fan of team agreements. Why do you ask? I'm joking, but I'm really serious that team agreements is how we design our teams to work and almost always has provisions for even reviewing that agreement. In my experience, what happens is a focused team agreement meeting or just something that comes up in retros. Teams not only do what they do, but we review what we do, how and why. We make adjustments as necessary so we keep our teams healthy. So now that we've got an understanding of the power of Jedi in our design systems, let's look back at our story and interrogate how our Jedi concepts could have helped the team solve for the most vulnerable. So we're going to pick up from where Brandy realizes that her PR has been closed without comment. Identifying a problem. When Brandy realizes her PR was closed without comment, she reached out to the team to let them know this was a problem. The diverse team shared their perspectives of the situation. While they all had different points of view on why closing a PR isn't great, they agreed that it's a problem. Identifying the most vulnerable. Because the team had agreed to make inclusion and equity design criteria for their team, they knew they had to think about what folks on the team needed and create an intentional space for those needs to be shared. It was quickly clear that Brandy was the most vulnerable because as a junior, she was missing some feedback from her PR review. And as a Black woman, there's some inherent risk to her professional career. Refining the problem. The team asked Brandy what issues she saw in this situation. She shared that the lack of clarity around expected PR processes needed to be addressed because A, it would help her generally develop an improved PR process, and B, she would be able to rely back to that if something else ever happened with the PR that fell off. Designing a solution. With the refined problem in hand, the team was able to come together to think through possible solutions. Quite a few of them were put on the table, but the one Brady thought tackled the issue best was recommending that the PR process be added to the team agreement. It directly addressed the problem, and the side effects were positive for all the team because then everyone would know what is expected. The entire design included Brandy bringing up the issue post stand-up and asking to understand what happened. The answers would be captured by the QE, and the delivery lead would recommend amending the team agreement and handle scheduling the meeting to do so. Then a senior developer would pair with Brandy to update the existing PR to meet any standards. The next day, the team implemented the solution. They listened to the lead dev's concern, invited other team members to share their perspectives. The delivery lead's suggestion to update the team agreement to cover the PR process was broadly popular and a meeting was scheduled. The team regrouped after discussing how it went. The QE pointed out that the client QE hadn't really been given room to speak. And the team noted that during the team agreement meeting, they would intentionally invite them to speak up. They also candidly shared their learnings with other teams at labs, encouraging them to add PR processes to their team agreements if they didn't have it already. How did justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion impact the team for the most vulnerable? We've covered a lot of ground in today's session. Before we move on to the unrecorded discussion, let's just review real quick. So we kicked off the session by reviewing the process of solving for the most vulnerable. We talked about diversity. We talked about equity, inclusion, and justice. We also learned how those JEDI concepts support every step in the process of solving for the most vulnerable. In our story, our diverse team was able to provide their perspectives of the situation and identify a problem. They inclusively shared what each team member needed, which allowed them to identify the most vulnerable. They trusted Brandy to refine the problem based on her needs. From there, the team was able to come together to discuss possible solutions and select one that solved the problem. We also saw that the team implemented the solution fairly, keeping focused on their intention, evaluating their impact, and sharing the benefit with other teams. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. I hope you learned why justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion are important elements in system designs and in solving for the most vulnerable. In our next session, we'll talk about the JEDI skill of control. In that session, we'll learn how to orient ourselves in different social hierarchies and to uncover what forces are at work within us. Some of the concepts we'll review are self-interrogation, power in systems, and biases in society.